Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. Oh no, I wrote the date wrong. Already off to a terrible start. As we record this, tomorrow is May 1st, 2024.
It's gonna be May. You're welcome.
Oh, yes. Oh, Star Wars month is upon us. Memes like that, yes. But May 1st is also otherwise known as May Day and or International Workers' Day. And we were, at the beginning of every month, we try to put together our calendar. And I was like, I'm sure there's something with May Day. And there is. However, I will say we have talked about some of this before. We've never specifically focused on it, but we do have past episodes on Labor Day, although I think it was fashion related, if I'm remembering correctly. This was way back in like Kristen.
I was like, I don't know, because I don't remember this conversation at all.
Oh, no, it was before us. But there was one we did that was related to Labor Day. But anyway, we also did When Women Organize, which was something that we're going to touch on in here. And also we did women in unions, and we've done a couple of like powerful women in unions. So we've got a lot of stuff around this. This is going to be a bit of a shorter episode, but it's twisty. I wasn't expecting this because it actually is related to the holiday May Day, which I have never celebrated. Have you celebrated?
Absolutely not. That's such a foreign idea to me. Again, like I said, I told you earlier, I was like, isn't that just more like a European thing? Like, I don't know much about it. And I really didn't associate that to labor or like any of those international labor days. So I was like, oh, okay. So excited.
It's a very interesting story as to how they are related. I never have celebrated it. I think of Midsommar, the movie, when I think of May Day, which I'm sure is not what many people who celebrate it would like, because that is a horror movie. One we should talk about on this show.
Have we not?
I don't think we've done a specific episode on it. I think we've mentioned it, but I do find the different takes generally men and women have on that movie fascinating. Because I've been so like, wow, all this gaslighting, and I've had many male friends like, gaslighting, what? Like, oh.
Interesting.
Yes. But okay, so yeah, let's get this festival out of the way. For a long time, May Day has referred to a spring festival involving flowers and a maypole that heralds the coming of spring. Going back to ancient Rome, May Day fell in the middle of a festival called Floralia, celebrating Flora, who was the goddess of flowers, spring, and youth. When the Romans arrived in the British Isles, they brought this festival with them, where it lined up with the Celtic holiday Beltane. I hope I didn't butcher that. They combined similar elements to create May Day, celebrated on May 1st. And by medieval times, May Day was a popular holiday throughout Europe.
Is that the way at the beginning of like the Scottish festival for the Outlander, where she gets sucked into time? Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever seen this? If I say this and I'm wrong, people are going to be really pissed because people love that movie. I like, or that show, and I like it too. But they have this whole festival where it's just supposed to be like witches. They come together and go into the island around this one rock and chant. But they dance very like, they have like crowns, I believe, and white dresses and chanting.
Yeah.
It sounds like that, but I could be very damn wrong.
It's very similar, as I haven't seen either this or a May Day celebration, but to me it sounds right, because this holiday, and listeners, please write in if you celebrate it, because people do celebrate it still, involves people going out Maying in the early morning to gather flowers and decorate for the celebration. And there were games, dances, and many held pageants to crown a May Queen, a woman who was basically the overseer of all of the festivities. The maypole was often the centerpiece of these festivals. It was a birch pole that was brought in by an ox that had flowers, decorated with flowers, and it was adorned with streamers for dancers to hold on to as they made their way around the pole.
Okay.
Yes.
The Samhain festival.
They are related, though.
Are they? Okay, so that is how happens in October, apparently.
Yes, but so Samhain and May Day are like the opposite. So Samhain is Halloween, is fall.
Okay.
And then May Day is like when Samhain is over, spring is coming, but they're supposed to complement each other.
So don't get me. I just knew it was a very pretty festival that happened in like dresses and they seemed to dance with flowers.
Let me know if I'm incorrect, because that's just from the articles that I've read. But again, this has not been my experience growing up. Apparently, another tradition was to make people gift baskets with flowers and treats, leave them at the doorstep, knock or otherwise alert the person inside to their presence, and then run. And if the receiver of the basket caught the giver, they owed them a kiss, which I'm assuming could be very platonic, because the anecdotal story I read was like a young girl and her best friend. So like, I don't think it had to be romantic, although there were plenty of accounts of it being sort of a young people disappearing in the woods type of festival.
Oh, well, dang.
I know. And I read in some places that the basket is meant to represent women's fertility, and the pole is meant to represent male fertility, and the taller the pole, the better. Which did give me a chuckle.
Is that why just the girls wrap around it?
I believe so, Samantha.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah. And then you get your May Queen. It's very interesting. Also, I would love if someone would write in about this. I read in Hawaii Lei Day, which is kind of something that came around this. The celebration focused on making and giving leis, started in 1929. So write in, let us know. All right. So at first, colonial Americans were very wary of May Day, allegedly even breaking up a May Day celebration and sending the person who threw it back to England. There's like a poem about it, and I think it's reenacted at May Day celebrations. So it left an impression, just because they kind of associated it, sort of like you, Samantha, as a very European thing. Like, we don't do that. But May Day did eventually gain traction in the US in the late 1800s, but in two very different ways, though they both revolved around the rights of workers. One of these movements was composed of people from well-off and influential families. And at the time, this group of well-off folks were looking at the migrants and immigrants coming into U.S. cities with concern. They were worried that the work would exhaust them and that they would spend their free time on what they viewed as things that were void of educational value and empty of American values, in heavy quotes, things like amusement parks or carnivals. They considered this a waste. So they thought they'd bring something back that they associated with white Anglo-Saxon values, May Day, the holiday. So in the 1870s, May Day celebrations started taking place on campuses of women's colleges, primarily at first. The women would do the traditional dances while wearing the traditional white. They might reenact this play I mentioned. To spread the practice, the well-off introduced Maying again and May Day festivals to American elementary schools.
The other group set about making May Day a day reserved for laborers. After industrialization and the Civil War, workers started organizing into unions. Yay! The connotation of May Day took on a new meaning in 1886 when on May 1st, 200,000 workers in Chicago and other cities went on strike while pushing for an 8-hour day. The strikes became violent and, yes, eventually earned the name Haymarket Affair. Many were wounded and several died. And yes, we do talk about it a little bit in the book with the Haymarket and who did this. And yes, there are actual Haymarket organizations today. They named after this.
Yes. And we did talk about it in When Women Organize, that episode 2, which is a 2-parter, if I'm remembering correctly. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And there was a lot of moving pieces in it. So definitely go check those things out. Look it up.
Lucy Parsons. That's the name that we know with this. So
yes,
there you go.
Lucy Parsons. So to commemorate what happened on this date, the International Socialist Conference declared May 1st as an international holiday highlighting labor, now known as International Workers' Day, in 1889, though it was officially signed into U.S. law in 1894. The 8-hour workday itself went into effect in the U.S. in 1916, although I read in other places it was way earlier than that. I wonder if that was just kind of the federal level.
Right. They finally intervened.
Yes. However, during the Red Scare and the Cold War in the U.S., this May Day celebration, International Workers' Day, I should say, drew a lot of ire and suspicion. And in 1958, President Eisenhower signed a resolution that labeled May 1st as Loyalty Day, claiming that it would be, quote, a special day for the reaffirmation of loyalty to the United States of America and for the recognition of the heritage of American freedom.
Why is this a constant where, I swear, they take something and redo it for their own sake? It's a smart play, but it's really flippin' annoying. Like taking words that were about racial equality or, like equity. And then they no, that means they're trying to be too liberal. And then they take this whole, they do the social scare, the Red Scare, in a different format. Just woke is the conversation. It's like, what's happening? But they're really good at it. It's really annoying too.
It is. It is. And it's so many times I'll read things like this and I get why they worked, but I'm also like, it's so silly and transparent. It's a Loyalty Day.
Yes, it's a lazy work that ends up overtaking that conversation. It's literally nothing original about it. They just retake it and rebrand it. It's the whole I'm rubber, you're glue.
Yeah.
With terminology.
Yeah. And definitely those kind of hard those words that get thrown about with patriotism, where it's like, well, if you don't support Loyalty Day, then you
right.
Terrible communists, get out.
Right.
Yeah.
So other countries had groups and organizations that adopted International Workers' Day, such as the International Socialist Congress in France, who resolved to mark May 1st, 1890 with, quote, great international demonstration. Other European entities followed suit, later combining the demonstrations with festival-like elements. To the point that within a decade, so many Europeans had adopted the holiday that Americans started to associate it with European socialism as opposed to American unionism. Some unions wanted to avoid any association with radicalism, stopped celebrating May Day, and pivoted to Labor Day in September instead. Again, this happens a lot. It's such an interesting tactic.
It's sad, but it's kind of comical to me that Americans were suspicious of May Day, the festival, because it was too European. And then they were like, well, maybe we'll go back to that. But then they were like, unions and fight for work and labor rights and all this. And then Europeans started doing it. They were like, oh, no, let's pull back.
We got to pull back here. We can't be seen as that. That's too much.
It became too European. It's just...
I mean, it kind of... There's so many things that I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to this mind frame of we need equality. Oh no, other people took it. We don't want to be anything like them. We want to be wait, what?
But it's just strange that today. I didn't know this. I didn't know May Day started in the U.S.
Yeah.
I associate it with Europe.
Right.
I associate International Workers' Day outside of the U.S.
Right. And they're like, no. We don't want to associate with you. We want our own thing, so we'll give this to you. Scrape that from history, please.
Right. Oh, my gosh. Well, in Europe, especially beginning in the run-up to World War I, May Day, or International Workers' Day, became a place of anti-war protest and general political upheaval. The history gets pretty messy. I think that would be a whole podcast separately if we wanted to do that, and probably a different podcast than this one. But during World War II, for instance, the Nazis tried to co-opt it in Germany, calling it National Workers' Day or something, leading to folks starting an uprising. Some countries outright banned it. Other countries have also used May Day for political protest. As of today, International Workers' Day is an officially recognized holiday in 66 countries and unofficially in a bunch more. So you can look it up. A lot of amazing things have happened. A lot of devastating things have happened on May Day, but a lot of countries have adopted it. All right. pivoting back. Okay. In the 1900s, European-style May Day celebrations, as in the festival, were still popular in the US, but they never achieved displacing entertainment like arcades and amusement parks, as was intended. And eventually these celebrations faded, although I did read people do still celebrate in the US. So again, listeners, let us know. But millions around the world do still mark International Workers' Day. So while women were involved in these strikes, and we've spoken about some specific powerful examples, as mentioned, a lot of the coverage was on men, since women, or white women particularly, were confined to the domestic sphere, which is something we always have to keep in mind around this conversation about women in work. But several instances did bring women to the forefront, including New York City's 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory incident that resulted in 146 deaths, mostly of women and girls. This is one example in the US, and there are numerous ones in this country and around the world. So all of this is important for a number of reasons when it comes to intersectional feminism. The gender pay gap still exists. It is worse for women of color. Sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, racial discrimination, LGBTQ plus discrimination, discrimination against disabled folks. Similar things exist around the world in various forms and to various extents. We saw these things get worse during the pandemic. We've seen the numbers go the wrong way in a lot of instances. And remember, the US currently doesn't really have maternity or paternity leave. Like, we don't have great healthcare that many of us have to get through our work. Accessible childcare is still out of reach for a lot of people. So it's important. And this all did start, this May Day, International Workers' Day thing. Started with a push for an 8-hour workday, but recent surveys have found women routinely work longer than 8 hours, and much of it is unpaid, unrecognized labor. And that's like at work. That doesn't even count at home, all of that other stuff. And as we mentioned in previous episodes too, women and marginalized folks are and have been at the forefront of movements to change things, even as we're seeing rollbacks of things put in place around child labor, which we were just talking about, for instance, Samantha, or huge companies leveraging their massive sources to squash attempts at unionizing. There are people still fighting, and these things are important. And we have, in our own company, we've been working towards a union for over 2 years, I think. And it's just been really a lot of pushback, but a huge shout out to our bargaining committee, who has really been fighting even when they meet so much resistance and wrangling all of us, because we're all over the place. We do all kinds of different things. And
right. It's been interesting because the shift in constant rotation, because of the way that people, the higher ups and execs and sides, are stretching this out, and it's causing people, like, I can't imagine. I can't imagine, because I think I stepped foot in it for like a split second. I was like, oh, this is a lot of work. And it is a lot of work. And so we definitely want to shout out to those who are fighting that fight. And we do support you. Yeah, for sure.
We do. It's
been interesting. And yeah, just unions are not a bad thing. And the fact that people are trying to squash it says a lot.
It does. And just like with anything, of course, there's been examples of like, oh, that wasn't great. That one person wasn't great. But that doesn't mean like the whole thing is bad.
There's this whole level of who are the players. Yeah. And when we come back to find it, there's a lot that are bad players because they're planted there.
Yeah. And you know, those things get so much attention. But again, there's so many people who've been doing this work who are not getting any attention, who have been doing it. And personally, it just frustrates me so much when I'll hear someone who's anti-union be so excited about the weekend or being done with work. And I'm like, well, you know, that was like unions that did that.
Right.
We didn't used to have those things.
Right. And just as a reminder, this was all, like, we've talked about this. I think it's just a constant conversation, especially when you work in intersectionality, that rhetoric and media has really, really made people scared of things because it is not beneficial to those who are already in power. Like, that's the constant reminder of, like, when the bad things happen, it wasn't what you thought. And when you uncovered who was at the root of it and why it was there, it is because people who are in power were scared of losing something because they wanted to keep that power. And honestly, it's all this level of, like, it's not that people are asking not to work as much or whatever, whatnot. It's just being fairly compensated or treated fairly or able to actually afford and being told that when your family, which is a conversation we hear a lot for a lot of business practices, especially in the US, which is a fun rhetoric, and then being told, but you are really expendable and easily replaceable. Just that, like, you're supposed to treat them like the family, but you are not going to be treated as such.
Yes, you should be grateful that you're here.
Yes, which I was actually told that in my government job. We were like, hey, we get paid almost minimum wage and we would like to help these kids. And part of this kid is maybe buying them a lunch while having conversation. And you're telling us you're not going to compensate us. And then also we should be grateful for having a job. If you don't want like it to get out, we're like, which we were told at a conference. We were like, what? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. That was my government job. So, and then we absolutely could not unionize, and especially in the state of Georgia.
Yep. I laugh because it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone has any thoughts about this, if you've worked on a bargaining committee, if anyone's planning on protesting, please be safe. We're thinking of you because it is a lot of things usually happen on May Day.
And thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks to the people who've done this work and at our own company, to the people who are doing this work. But yes. All right. Here we go, May. Here we go. Yes, if you would like to contact us, listeners, you can. Our email is stephaniemomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at Mom Stuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You, or on YouTube. We also have a TeePublic store and a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.